Hey, it's Russell with SP, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the Shocker XLS eye system. Basic maintenance, troubleshooting, as well as how to access the entire eye system. To start with, regular maintenance and cleaning is going to involve simply removing the eye cover itself. For that, you'll simply need the 1/16 Allen key. If you choose to inspect the entire system, you'll need to remove the grips as well as the grip frame. To take the grips off, we'll need a 5/64 Allen key, and to remove the frame, we'll need a 1/8 Allen key. But before we get started on taking things apart, let's go ahead and use a basic troubleshooting procedure to inspect the current condition of the eye system in our XLS. To start with an eye test, the first thing we want to do is make sure that the breech is free and clear. Any obvious dirt, debris, or paint residue should be removed before the test begins. We also want to make sure that the bolt itself is in its most rearward position. You can do this by pushing in through the front and pushing on the bolt, or by reaching down through the feed tube and pressing on the bolt face. Either will make sure that the bolt is in its rearward position and isn't going to interfere with our test on the eyes. To start, we're going to go ahead and power up the marker by pressing the power button at the rear of the frame. You'll see that the eye status is showing that they are on and that there is nothing in the breech. This is indicated in two places. First of all, the power button flashing green indicates that the eyes are on. The flashing indicates that the breech is empty. Down on the OLED screen, you can see the word eye, and below it is an open circle. This indicates that the eyes are on, and again, nothing is in the breech. So to confirm function, what we're going to do is stick our finger into the breech. As you can see, the flashing power button is now solid, and the eye indicator is indicating a full breech. Removing my finger from the breech, immediately you can see that the indicator is open and that the power button has begun flashing again. Now, this tells me that the eyes are functioning just fine. Again, I'm going to stick my finger into the breech. They see my finger. I pull it back out. They don't see it. Now, it's important to note that the eye logic looks for a ball, and then an empty breech, and then a ball again. So if I were to keep my finger in the breech and activate the trigger, you'll see that the power button has gone red, and the eye system says eye fault. Removing my finger from the breech, the system goes back to normal and resets. Now, if I were to keep my finger in the breech for multiple cycles, again, you're going to see it go to the fault setting. Remove my finger again, and it resets. This tells me that the system is seeing the breech just fine and acting as it normally should. The last status for the eyes is completely off. To do that, we're just going to press the power button, 1, 2, 3, and you'll see that the eyes is now indicated with an X and the power button is flashing red. In this configuration, the board will have absolutely no reaction to me putting my finger in the breech multiple times. Go ahead and press and power off. And that is the basic test, just to confirm that our eyes are in fact working. Basic service on your eye system is very straightforward. You'll simply need to remove the one Allen key here and the other Allen key headed screw on the other side. Both of those have underneath them your ball detent as well as half of your sensor array, half on left, half on right. In order to service your eyes, you're going to take your 1/16 Allen key, insert it, and unscrew the securement screw. What I generally do is reach from the inside and press up on the detent, which will raise the cover enough for me to go ahead and grab it, and then I can set it aside. Inside this area, you will see a couple features. First of all, this large oval slot is where your ball detent rides in the breech. You want to make sure that's clean and free of both debris and any paint residue so that it doesn't bind on your ball detent itself. The sensor for the eye is located right here and is secured by 2 pins or bayonet mounts that allow it to slide straight on and straight off. This system also provides excellent alignment, so you want to make sure that it is pressed fully down into its location when you are finished with the service. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and remove the sensor, take a look at the eye pocket or the through hole where the eye looks into the breech. To do this, I'm going to take a dental pick, but as you can see, you can use a small Allen key to do the same, and go ahead and lift the sensor off of its 2 mounting points and fold it back slightly in order to gain access to both the sensor nodule and the through hole of the breech. So what we're going to do is we're going to look to clean the sensor nodule itself, or the node attached to the board, which is this white component here you see on the board itself. And then we also want to make sure that the through hole into the breech is clear of debris as well. Those two things are going to assure that the eye sees clearly into the breech. In order to reinstall the eye, we're simply going to lay it on a flat surface and press that sensor back down over those 2 pins, securing the eye back in its location. Reinstallation of the eye cover is straightforward. Simply check the orientation and then set into place, securing with your 1/16 Allen key. It's important to note that this does not need to be over tightened. Simply snug is more than enough to keep the eye cover in place. The process is exactly the same on the other side. For the next part of this video, we're going to take a look at inspecting the remaining components of the eye system, both where it attaches to the board and how it's routed up to the sensor location. To do that, we're going to start by removing the grips themselves. This is that 5/64 Allen key that we mentioned earlier. We're going to simply remove the 3 screws on the left-hand side of the marker. Now this is the left-hand side with the barrel facing away from you. You can also identify this side by the trigger mount screw right here. After we have removed those 3 screws, you'll be able to open up the grips and see the wiring as well as the 9-volt battery. As you can see, all the wiring is nicely coiled here, and then the 9-volt adapter is wrapped once around the battery before setting it into the frame. Taking the battery out, simply unwind the harness, then it had that one wrap, and go ahead and disconnect the battery and set it aside. Now in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and detach the 9-volt harness from the board. I want to do so by grabbing as close or completely on the connector. The reason I want to do this is to minimize the amount of stress on the wires that go into the connector. So now we've set that aside, we can see the 2 other wiring harnesses that are involved with the Shocker RSX. First of all, the multicolored wires and the 4 wires here are for the eye sensors. These 2 wires on this all black plug is for the solenoid. Since we're going to be removing the frame, we're going to go ahead and disconnect both of these. To do that, I'm simply going to extend the wires out and uncoil them, and then grab as close as I can to the plug and remove it from the board. So now I've taken the solenoid and disconnected it, and I've also straightened the wires out down towards the base of the frame. This will help with getting the frame off later. Now we're going to take our eye wires and again make sure that they're uncoiled and free, and reach down and grab the plug again and pull straight up. Again, we want to grab as close to or at the connector whenever possible to minimize the stress on these wires. Now since we are in here looking for potential issues with our wires, we want to make sure we take and inspect and look for any type of crimps or twisting here. We also want to look at the back of the plug to ensure that we haven't accidentally pulled any of the wires free. And then finally, we'll look down into the plug itself. There should be 4 perfectly straight vertical pins inside the connector itself. If any of these pins are bent or askew, they could not be engaging the eye harness itself, and that really could cause some issues with the eyes functioning properly. So in this case, we can see that our harness is in good condition. None of the wires are crimped, none of the wires have pulled out of the plug, and the plug itself has 4 perfectly attached pins and ready to proceed. So the next step will be to take off the grip frame. To make that a little bit easier, we're going to go ahead and straighten these wires out in the frame and then flip it over and go ahead and remove the other 3 screws for the grips. Now you can take the frame off without fully removing the grips. However, just for ease of handling, we recommend taking them off, as it's one less thing kind of flopping around while you're working. With all 6 of the grip screws removed, we can go ahead and set them aside and proceed with the frame removal. In order to remove the frame, we're going to look at doing 2 things. First of all, we're going to eject the bolt system. That makes things a little bit easier to handle, but it also makes sure that there's absolutely no air anywhere in the marker, which is imperative because when we separate the frame from the body, we're going to be exposing the main air channel, and we don't want to have any air released when we're doing that. The second thing I'm going to do is remove the Shocker XLS reg cover. Now, this is a standard feature on the marker, the reg cover, but in order to remove the frame, you can see it overlaps just a little bit right there, so we want to go ahead and take it off for the time being. With the grips off the marker, we can start to remove the frame. We're going to locate the 2 securement screws, one just behind the regulator, the other just behind the grip itself. I'm going to take our 1/8 inch Allen key and insert it here into the front Allen key spot. Now you'll notice when I actually go to break this loose, I am using the square end of the wrench and not the ball end. The reason for this is I am able to make full contact with the tool surface and have better control over the tool as I break the screw free. I'm going to do the same on the back, again just breaking it loose, again using the square end of the Allen key to assure I have good engagement. Now that they're both been loosened, I'm going to use my ball end because I'm able to tilt it away from the regulator slightly so I'm not scratching anything as I work the screw out. The first securement screw out, set it aside, and repeat the process again here on the rear frame screw. With that screw out, the frame will now lift clear, and we're going to do so with it laying down. The reason I have it laying down is so that I can clearly see these wires as I remove the frame from the body. We want to make sure we do this so that if any of these plug connectors get hung up while we're taking one off of the other, that we're not damaging the wires themselves. So you can see there, everything came apart free and clear, and we can work on the next step, which is inspecting our eye wires as well as the channel that they run through. With the trigger frame separated from the body, we can go ahead and set the trigger frame aside. We're currently concerned with, again, the multicolored wires that run from the board all the way up into the eye area, the chamber, the breech area. Now it's important to note that we did leave both sensors secured in their location. As we discussed earlier, they're held in place by those 2 pins and then further secured by the eye covers themselves. That makes it one less area where it's not connected, and that gives us some freedom to move things around and take a closer look. Now you'll notice that the eye wires come out of the eye pockets, run alongside the solenoid manifold. The bolt speed adjuster is here, the solenoid manifold is here. Runs alongside those and then finally up through a small securement loop, and then to 2 more securement clips, and down into the frame. In inspecting our wires, we're going to look at common pinch points, areas where we may not have gotten the eyes secured into their channel and potentially pinch them. The most common area for damage is here between the body and frame. Now it's important to note that the frame will not sit in place properly if you've pinched one of these wires. So the best way to avoid damage is to never actually have it occur in the first place. So when you're going to put your frame on your body at any point, you want to make sure that there's absolutely no resistance, because what you might be pinching or what you might be pushing on is one of these eye wires. As you can see, when they're properly installed, they are nice and deep in the groove, and there is zero likelihood of actually pinching them when they're properly installed. So again, the best way to keep your eyes functioning great is to keep them secured properly in the first place. Now, moving on, we're going to go ahead and put it back together as we've inspected our eyes and found there's absolutely no defects in the wires themselves. So to put the frame back on, what we're going to do is go ahead and straighten these wires one more time. Again, it makes it going into the frame that much easier. So with those wires straight, we're going to go ahead and look to put our frame back on. Putting our frame back on is just as easy as taking it off, but we want to make sure that we do a couple checks first. First of all, we want to take a look at our eye wires, make sure that they are neatly secured and do not sit above the edge of the body. Once again, when they're properly installed, there should be absolutely none protruding, and they should lay nice and flat. We want to confirm that it's through all its securement points, this loop here at the base of the solenoid manifold, and the 2 securement clips on the solenoid itself. Now these clips actually can be removed simply by pulling them up over off the end of the solenoid, but we're going to leave them on, and we want to make sure that they're well organized, because that's going to make the frame going on much easier. This little silver portion here is the last thing we want to check before we put the frame on. We want to make sure that no debris is accumulated on it and that the O-ring is nice and clean. To put the frame back on, we're simply going to slide the wires here as deep in the frame as we can get. It may take some wiggling, but you want to make sure that they come out the other side. In this case, I'm going to take my pick and reach up and just make sure that that solenoid wire is pulled free and clear the best it can through that area before sliding my frame back into place. Now, because all those wires were neatly sorted and everything where it needs to be, you'll see that there's absolutely no gap between the body and frame. You'll also notice that the body quickly popped into position on the frame without any resistance. This means that everything in that area is put together the way it should be, and we can go ahead and resecure our frame to the body. To resecure our frame to the body, we're going to go ahead and remount the frame. To do that, we're going to take the 2 largest screws that we removed earlier that were from here at the base of the frame and here at the front of the frame. First of all, we're going to drop them into place and take our 1/8 Allen key and go ahead and just get them started. By getting them started, we're just putting a first 2 or 3 threads of engagement to make sure the frame stays nice and stable as we finish it up. Now that we have both in, we're going to go ahead and snug them down. It's very important to limit the amount of torque that you put on either one of these screws. They don't need a lot to hold the frame on, but more importantly, if you over tighten the rear frame screw to an extreme level, you can actually impede the function of the latch itself. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just simply snug it down. Again, now it's nice and snug. We're going to set our Allen key aside and test the latch. The latch itself should move without any grit or resistance, and that tells us that we have our rear grip frame screw in the appropriate amount. The final step in this process is resecuring both the solenoid wiring harness and the eye wiring harness. The 9-volt adapter is very simply plugged into the board and then attached to the battery, so we're going to leave that for you. Now the first things first is to make sure that they are pulled in separate directions. This assures that neither of the wires are tangled up anywhere, and we'll be able to secure them nicely and neatly. So I'll start with the solenoid wires first, making sure that the 2 holes in the end of the plug properly align with the 2 pins in the connector. They are offset slightly to one side, so there is a right and wrong way to plug the harness in. Plugging it in, I'm going to take and make sure the wires are nice smooth arch and plug it into the connector itself. Now if you're like me and you have larger fingers, you can use a small Allen key, or in this case I'm going to use my dental pick to guide the plug into place and prevent me from bending either of those pins. With the harness plugged in, you can see the wires make a nice smooth loop. I'm simply going to twist that loop over once more and tuck it back up into the frame. With those neatly tucked out of the way, you can see I can now go ahead and repeat the same process with my eye harness. Again, the pins are offset to one side, so you want to confirm that the connector and the plug are oriented in the correct way when you put it back in to avoid bending those pins. Again, I'm going to utilize my dental pick to guide that plug straight up and down and into place, making sure not to bend any of those pins. Once again, you can see the wires form a nice arch. I'm going to again twist that once more and go ahead and push that up into the little storage area, the little pocket of space that's above that in the frame. So now my wires are nice and clean and tucked away, and we've completed a full inspection of the eye system on our Shocker XLS.